with us today, mayors from a whole variety of cities that came in yesterday, and we've been working yesterday through the evening. Early this morning, we were downtown, now we're here. And the purpose of this particular gathering is to look at the St. Louis technology ecosystem and understand how it developed over time, because each of the mayors that are here with the U.S. Conference of Mayors being directed by Brookings Institution is trying to figure out and understand other technology innovation systems around the country, what's working, what's not, and what they might be able to appropriate for their cities and take the unique assets that those cities have and leverage them into a creative entrepreneurial environment. So we've been very fortunate. You know, we're kind of showing the best of what we have to offer, but I can tell you that in the conversations that we've had with these mayors, there's a lot of tremendous opportunity and actual, not just opportunity, but a lot of tremendous things happening in the cities represented by these mayors here today, and they'll share a little bit of that with them. So without further ado, I want to introduce our Mayor Slay, Francis Slay. Probably be one of the last times I get to introduce Mayor Slay because of his tenure coming to an end after 16 years. I just want to say that that Mayor Slay has been a champion for Cortex and has worked with us over the 16 years. Actually, Cortex started about within a year after your tenure started, your first term. And he has been a partner with us in everything that we've done. And we could not be standing here today without his support, his assistance, the reflection of his staff and participation in all that we've done. So, Mayor, thank you very much for that.
I here at the Cortex Innovation Community, and it's a real pleasure for me to join with the Brookings Institution, with the Cortex representatives, as well as mayors and representatives from cities all over the United States who came here to see and to experience our innovation hub in St. Louis, and something we're very, very proud of. Joining me is Mayor Greg Fisher, who's mayor of Louisville, and he also heads the Conference of Mayors' efforts to promote innovation districts. He chairs the Council on Metro Economies and the New American City. Mayor Fisher, it's a pleasure to welcome you to St. Louis. We also have some other mayors who will be introduced in just a moment. We also have Bruce Katz, who is with us. Bruce is a Brookings Institution scholar. He has recognized Cortex as a gateway to innovation and inclusion, and has chosen St. Louis as a backdrop and a premier example of the best practices in the use of physical space, programming, and governance for economic success and inclusion in innovation districts. Bruce has studied and developed a deep understanding of how research institutions, firms, and universities can work to create progressive placemaking, areas where people want to live, work, and play, areas like Cortex. The Cortex Innovation Community has been a success for our entire region. Just yesterday, when I'm packing things to move, I was looking at a little piece of glass, which was a memorabilia from the opening of Cortex it was a groundbreaking back in 2004. So it was 13 years ago that occurred, and since then we've seen this organization grow tremendously because of the partnerships and the leadership that we've had here. They have brought here and have created an environment that attracted job creators, dreamers, doers, thought leaders, the people and businesses imagining, innovating, and creating a more resilient St. Louis. You can find good food, good coffee, interesting spaces, and even more interesting people throughout the campus here. So when Mayor Fisher approached me about coming to see what we are all about in St. Louis, I was very happy to welcome him and the rest of the delegation. We have a lot to share about our experiences getting to this point. The seed was planted nearly 2 decades ago, as Dennis was talking about 16 years ago, and has taken root and has grown exponentially in the last 7 years. We saw a real need for this type of space. Companies across America were downsizing and merging, and technology was growing. And we saw more and more entrepreneurs, people with ideas that they wanted to grow, and we wanted to keep them and their ideas in St. Louis. So with the Cortex board in place, the city contributed to the plan development and funded through tax increment financing primarily the infrastructure so that they had the tools necessary to be successful. We now have a world-class technology here in the city. Our tech sector is one of our strongest economic drivers, and people are noticing more and more that companies doing business here are helping to add to the high-quality tech jobs in our city. Much of the success can be attributed to those who have been here from the beginning. BJC, of course, Washington University, University of Missouri St. Louis, and Missouri Botanical Garden, among others, and the city's economic development department, which is headed by Otis Williams, who's done a great job, and of course Dennis Lauer, his leadership. When the organization brought Dennis in here, things really started coming together. Dennis's thoughtfulness, his leadership have driven impressive growth throughout the corridor, including more than $500 million of development within the footprint and more than $700 million of investment outside the Cortex district. This is a tremendous example of placemaking. I want to thank my colleagues from the U.S. Conference of Mayors for your visit to St. Louis, and I hope that each mayor or municipal representative learns something here that they can take back home. I'm certain you have a whole lot of things in your cities that we can learn from as well, and I have visited some and have brought some really great ideas back to St. Louis. So it is now my pleasure to welcome to the microphone a man who has been serving as an outstanding mayor of Louisville now for 6.5 years, somebody that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. I've worked with at the Conference of Mayors. I consider him a good friend of mine, and he's someone who's a very well-respected leader at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Mayor Fisher. Mayor Fisher.
Thank you, Mayor. So before I share a few remarks, I'd like for each of the mayors just to introduce themselves with names and cities.
Jim Langfelder, Springfield, Illinois.
Jim Grader, Carmel, Indiana.
Beth Van Dyne, Irving, Texas.
Bill Wild, West End, Michigan.
Jorge Elorza, Providence, Rhode Island.
Mark Sudla, Mayor of Little Rock, Arkansas.
Christopher Cabaldon, Mayor of West Sacramento, California.
So thanks, everybody. So we are a group of mayors, obviously from around the country, all involved with the United States Conference of Mayors. One of the things we love to do at the conference is learn what the best practices are around the country. This particular task force is a Council on Metro Economies in the New American City, and there's several things that are important to the New American City, but certainly innovation is one of those. We know that cities that are focused on innovation and globalization are going to be cities that are going to be leading the country as we go forward. This is the second of 2 stops that this task force is working on to define what the best practices are in innovation districts taking place in the United States of America. About 6 months ago, we were in Pittsburgh, working with Carnegie Mellon, UPID, looking at autonomy, looking at robotics. And as we decided where was the final stop we wanted to go, there was really only one spot, and that was St. Louis. What you all have done here has been phenomenal with your entrepreneurship activities, your innovation activities. There was a complication. We wanted to get here while Mayor Slade was still the mayor. And obviously, you have a quick transition between an election and a new mayor. So I really can't thank Mayor Slade enough for accommodating us here in the last week that he's been the mayor of the city. It's really emblematic of the type of mayor that he's been for the United States Conference of Mayors, is a guy that's always willing to share what knowledge he has to make all the other cities better as well. And I can tell you there are not many mayors that have served their cities in this country for 16 years in a row like he has. And we wanted to get here before he was gone, really to say thank you to Mayor Slay on behalf of all United States mayors for the leadership that he's given the conference that we have on areas both big and small. And he's the kind of guy that says, come on down, it's the last week, we're happy to share our learnings here. And his role, obviously one of the things we're looking at while we're here is what is the mayor's role in creating innovation and entrepreneurship in a city. And a great mayor is right in the middle of all that type of activity. And what we've learned from your downtown innovation center at T-Rex to Creve Coeur to what we're doing out here at Cortex has the fingerprints of the mayor, city leaders all over each and every one of these things. And it takes a team to do that. And when you have a good mayor, like Mayor Slay, that teamwork is a lot easier. So again, Mayor Slay, I want to thank you on behalf of the United States Conference of Mayors for hosting us here this week, and more importantly for the 16 years that you've been a phenomenal mayor for St. Louis. St. Louis has been very fortunate to have Mayor Francis Slay. Thank you all. Next up is Bruce Katz. Bruce is a global thought leader on issues metropolitan, author of the book, The Metropolitan Revolution, which has kind of redefined the role of cities in the world as we look at federal governments that are struggling, state governments that are struggling, and the nexus of activity is at the city level, and there's no one in the world that knows more about that than Bruce Katz.
Thanks, Mayor Fisher, and thank you, Mayor Slay. So Brookings is obviously located in Washington, D.C., but we were started by Robert Brookings, a business person from St. Louis, so it's great to be here. And these are places where you have advanced research institutions, medical campuses, working with mature companies, startups, scale-ups, incubators, venture investors. I could say after looking at dozens and dozens of these, that the Cortex district is one of the most globally significant innovation districts in the world. And that's because of several things. This is a place where different institutions, and the mayor mentioned them, Washington University, Barnes-Jewish, etc., are collaborating to compete. That normally doesn't happen in most cities in the United States and abroad. What happens is institutions focus on what they do, but they don't really work together for the bigger whole. Second, this is a real public-private partnership. Cortex has been delegated powers by the city government, which has enabled it to grow and nurture this innovation community. So there's been very, very smart public sector activity, which has been a platform for what has happened in this city. And that's why I think there's something to learn here by other mayors. And finally, there is a real focus on bringing more people in St. Louis along for the ride. There is enormous national interest in the magnet high school that has been created in this district because it's a signal that many young adults can begin to participate with the right skills in the life sciences and biosciences sector. So it is a pleasure to be in St. Louis. Whether you know it or not, there are many innovation districts around the world who look at what Cortex has accomplished and say, how do we replicate, adapt, and tailor the secret sauce? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay, are there any questions that you'd like to ask any of the mayors? Or have we said it all?
How many mayors are involved this week and are here in St. Louis?
We've got about 10 mayors here and about another 40 or 50 folks from around the country with mayors, without mayors, that are all involved in this particular area of economic development and idea generation.
Seriously, in a sense, it seems very generous to teach mayors in other places about how to do innovation. Is there sort of that concern of competition?
No. One thing we do at the Conference of Mayors, we learn a lot from each other. And while we compete, when we go back home, when we get together, we're always sharing ideas. And that's what the Conference of Mayors is all about. It's a great organization. So I have visited other cities and have brought really good ideas back home. And we're always happy to share ideas so other cities can succeed. And if there's something that we're doing really well here, we don't mind sharing that with other people in other cities and let them do that. And hopefully they'll be successful as well. But we have done some really wonderful things here with education, with governance, and a lot of other things that I've learned from the Conference of Mayors and from particular mayors throughout the country. So that's not a concern of ours. But when we get back home, we do compete. There's no question about that.
I'd also like to respond to that. Innovation economic development is really based on growing your own companies locally. It's based on leveraging the assets that are unique to your particular city. We spent a lot of time yesterday and today talking about that very issue, that when these mayors go back, they need to do their own inventory. What are the assets? What can we leverage? That's not a competitive environment. We're really trying to lift all boats across the country, and each of us has our own set of assets and that we can leverage. And so it's not a competitive thing. It really is learning from each other. What are the best practices to grow our own companies in the cities that we represent?
And Dennis, I just want to get a quick tally. There are 300 companies within Cortex?
We have 320, actually we have 330. It went up 10 from last week. We have 330 companies in Cortex right now.
And that's like 4,200 employees or so?
It's about 4,400 employees now. And we also have a mayor that just joined us. We ran around and introduced ourselves.
Oh, okay. I'm John Mitchell. I was told to dress like a tech entrepreneur. I'm the mayor of New Bedford, Massachusetts, and thanks for having us, Mayor Slay. This is a great swan song for you. You guys in St. Louis should be very proud of the mayor's legacy. This is, from my perspective, a remarkable achievement, and it doesn't happen without the drive of the mayor's office behind.
And you fooled me, I thought you were a tech entrepreneur.
Look at me, yeah, I fit in, I'm feeling the vibe. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
So this is a good example. What New Bedford is trying to do, what the mayor is trying to do there, is to leverage the unique assets of New Bedford. And those assets that he's leveraging are marine science, because it's the largest fishery, I guess, in the country at this point. And so marine science, partnering with the University of Massachusetts, and also wind energy, offshore wind energy. So reaching across to Europe, where this is much more established, and trying to bring some of that here. So each of these cities have a unique set of assets that they need to leverage. Are there any other questions? All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey guys, so, the